Welcome. I see our members are starting to sign in. A warm welcome to you all. We are just going to allow a few moments for the rest of the attendees to sign in. While we wait for that, I'm going to ask those of you that are online, maybe just use the chat function, pop us a message to let us know your name and where you are signing in from today. We have UNISA Cup from the Eastern Cape. Welcome. Thanks, everybody. If you've just signed in, welcome. We are just allowing a moment for the rest of the attendees to sign on. While we give them that moment, we are using the chat function. I see we have Annie again from Sweden. It is so lovely to have you, Annie. Welcome. Tracy from Pretoria. Andre from Cape Town. Welcome, everyone. We are just going to give it a moment longer for the rest of the participants to sign in. We have Lorna from KwaZulu-Natal, my hometown. Welcome, Lorna. We have Camille from Durban. Paul from KZN. Welcome, guys. While we are giving everyone a moment to sign in, for those of you who just joined the session, please make use of the chat function. Just pop us a message with your name and where you are signing in from this afternoon. We will begin shortly. We have Asa Norden. I hope I said your name correctly, also from Sweden. It is so lovely to have international students attend our sessions today. Thank you very much. Njabulu from the Free State. Welcome. We have Leon Roots from UNISA in Pretoria. Thank you for signing in today. I think we should, oh, sorry, that was someone else greeting. Okay, I think with that being said, we look about ready to begin. So a warm welcome again to everyone, and thank you for signing in for the Gender-Based Violence webinar series, collaboration between Golden Key SA, UNISA, Father in Nation, SAfAIDS, and Vitality Wellness. Today is session 6 of 11, and I would like to welcome everyone on the panel. I'll now introduce you to the MC for today. I know we are still waiting on a few more panel members as well. But for now, Pastor Juanita Cup will take over. So I'm just going to introduce her for you. Pastor Juanita Cup is an ordained minister in the Full Gospel Church. She has been a full-time minister for the last 14 years. She is a CPSC Level 5 religious professional. Juanita holds a master's degree in theology, dogmatics at Northwest University. In 2017, she was awarded the Northwest University Linti de Lange Trophy for Best Ethics Student by the Faculty of Theology. She is currently serving as the Vice President of the Golden Key International Honor Society Alumni Committee in the Eastern Cape. Her hobbies include doing karate, mixed martial arts, singing, songwriting, and doing research. Her passion is to help individuals achieve their goals, and she loves being involved in community upliftment. Juanita's motto in life is never give up. Thanks, Juanita. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Wow, what a lovely afternoon to be spending with you again. Thank you to our attendees. We appreciate you. We love your attendance, and we love growing in this webinar series with you. Also, welcome to our international students. We are so glad to have you because we know that the impact is far-reaching and that we will end up by formulating solution finding to the problem of gender-based violence. It is my pleasure to welcome you from the Golden Key Southern Africa head office. We do stand in collaboration with our wonderful partners UNISA, Vitality Wellness, Father in Nation, and SAfAIDS. And it has been quite a journey as we have progressed through this webinar series to learn more and more, and also to engage with the attendees and the people that are victimized by this phenomenon of gender-based violence. I will now move over to introducing one of our speakers today, and her name is Edith Masihofa. Edith Masihofa Tapfuma is from Vitality Wellness. Edith is a seasoned senior development social scientist and strategist with organizational track record working in international organizations in South Africa and international. Edith is currently lead and managing consultant for Vitality Wellness Zimbabwe and has previously co-authored a book entitled Tales of Womanhood, Compelling Stories of Resilience and Women's Empowerment. Edith is an expert in promoting private sector sustainability, decent work and diversity management. Edith has a strong background promoting women's economic empowerment, managing HIV and AIDS, wellness, advocacy and policy processes, poverty reduction strategies and gender programming for private sector, CSOs, FPOs, media, youth and women organizations. Edith is also a social entrepreneur with interest in empowering women and girls. Edith is also board chairperson for SAfAIDS Zimbabwe, an organization committed to supporting the learning needs of children with autism and providing a parent support network. Edith is a travel enthusiast and loves cooking for her family. And her favorite saying, Nyasha Ngwadzi Wande in Shona, meaning it means in Shona, may grace abound. Edith lives with her husband and 3 children in Harare in Zimbabwe, and we are so blessed to have her with us today. Edith, while I open Leon's phone and just tell us, just give us an indication.
Anita, it's actually Nyasha Ngadziwande. Nyasha Ngadziwande, and it really just speaks to make grace abound. Yes, because I really going through or in whatever space, and I'm one person is sufficient. With whatever tribulation, I always like to remind myself that this too for me. So it's Nyasha Ngadziwande.
Practice that, and I've such a wonderful. Next on our panel, we have Leon Roots, who is a program convener of postgraduate program of Social and Behavior Studies, HIV/AIDS, within the Department of Sociology. He's also the program manager of Terasano Collaborative Projects, focusing on the advocacy of diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusion in communities, curriculum, and workplaces. Currently, he's the convener of the university's Employee Health and Wellness Working Group and has been involved in this field in various sectors over years, including the development of workplace policy and program frameworks. His MA focused on pathways to manhood, while he's currently working on his PhD, which will present some guidelines on how to implement male-friendly employee health and wellness workplace programs. He's also served as chairperson of SAfAIDS South Africa between 2015 until 2020 and provided strategic advice and support to different organizations in both the public and private sector on HIV, health, and wellness. So we welcome Leon Roots here as well from UNISA. And as an introductory statement, I just want to share a few notes on the nature and types of gender-based violence. And I think it's very important that we also recap from the previous sessions what has come alight. What light has been shown in the darkness? What has come to the fore? What has been made available to us in order for us to readdress the situation of gender-based violence? Now we'll list the types of gender-based violence, and we've extensively discussed the omnious reach of the phenomenon of gender-based violence across the world, and especially in our country. And to recap for those who've only joined us here in this session, session 6, for the previous sessions, you are welcome to visit our YouTube channel, Golden Key Southern Africa, where you are able to download the recorded sessions. But for those who are only joining us today, let us recap and let us introduce it, the topic as we hand over to our speakers. Now, gender-based violence presents itself in various shapes and forms. It's a global attack on our women and children. And it's 5 times higher in South Africa than in other countries, actually 5.1 times, which is extremely worrying. South Africa is classified as the rape capital of the world. The question has been asked, why is it that our country is ravaged by this societal evil? And questions have been asked about the presence of the faith community in all of this, as often pastors and religious leaders are a part of the problem. Another point discussed was the fact that it occurs in the workplace when the culprits are often top executives and CEOs. And a decision was reached by the panel during these sessions that there must be an absolute policy of no tolerance for this kind of behavior, no matter what status they hold. Gender-based violence, what types and what forms are there? Now, the types are the different ones. I will list them for you now. Firstly, we find psychological violence, to psychologically put someone under pressure or to threaten them. You also find stalking, that is to exert behaviors towards someone else that makes them feel unsafe. We find physical violence, when someone physically brings harm to someone. We find forced marriages, to force someone to enter into a marriage. We know that involves the consummation of the marriage, which also involves sex, and this often happens to underage children. Sexual violence, including rape, to force someone to have intimate relationships with someone else. Female genital mutilation, the cultural practice to alter the female body in a very cruel way. Forced abortion and forced sterilization, to force them to abort their babies or to force them to be sterilized. Sexual harassment, to invade the personal space of another human being to the point where they're not only uncomfortable but suffer serious emotional and mental problems, often because they see no way out of their situation and they are driven by fear. Now, what are the effects of GBV on the victims? There are physical injuries. There are the contraction of sexual transmitted diseases, HIV, unwanted pregnancies, and even death. And statistics show that around 2,700 individuals plus minus died from GBV since the year 2000. How did we get to this place? We have to ask ourselves as a country, how did we get to a number this high and who is doing something about it? This is why we are having this webinar series, to find solutions, to formulate the way forward. Now, Lizette Leroux from UNISA is also one of our speakers regularly. She mentioned in a previous webinar that statistics have shown that if a perpetrator is only caught when he reaches his 50s, let's say they only discover him when he's already in his 50s, he has possibly had 500 victims already. I therefore ask, where are the 500 people that he abused? And why did they not speak up? We have noted that fear often sets in. Stigma keeps victims silent. The fear of rejection makes them hide their scars and their pain. And in the ministry in the last 14 years, I've realized that people just want love and acceptance. Now, Teresa from SAfAIDS has delineated that often women let their male counterparts get away with this type of behavior, and they blame themselves for the presence of the problem. And I asked, why is it that they have such low self-esteem, that they would even think that it is their fault that they are going through gender-based violence, that they have become victimized by this phenomenon? And then, of course, we discussed gender equality and what it entails. Let's ask ourselves today in this new session as we move over to our next topic, when does disagreement become violence? Because we all have disagreements, but when can a disagreement be classified as a situation where violence has transpired? And it seems to me that the definition of what a disagreement is and what violence pertains to it's often confused. So when does a disagreement go too far? When does it border on or become violence? I'm convinced that women who undergo gender-based violence through their intimate partners or by way of the hands of their intimate partners don't know the difference. Physical violence, yes, we know the difference. That's easy to discern. It's a disagreement that turns into physical violence. The person in the process, the victim, is hurt in a physical manner, yes. But what about the mind games that accompany gender-based violence? And I want us to also maybe through the series speak about how gender-based violence, how those perpetrators work with the minds of their victims, because it's not only a physical thing. Sometimes it attacks, in most cases, it attacks the minds of the victims. What about the mind games? The perpetrators, the predators, are often so manipulative that they get away with their behavior far too long or even indefinitely. A disagreement, in my opinion, from a ministerial point of view, turns into violence when the abuse takes shape in the form of entrapment, in the form of degradation, humiliation, continuous mortification, when there is shame that is imposed on the victim, indignity and dishonor, when the victim is being torn apart by the partner on all levels, shredded into pieces within their being, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And what often occurs is the victims often become fractured and fragmented in themselves. And that is where you find DID, dissociative identity disorder, occurring, especially in children. These victims are hurt. And what happens to them is, as a person, they are fragmented and they become more versions of themselves. GBV is the underlying factor of evil cycles in society. Violence, rape, incest, the things that we see that's happening on a global scale and which is a tremendous problem in our society today. Now, what is the nature of GBV from a ministerial point of view? And I put focus on that because that is where I've been working for the last 14 years mainly. The nature to myself, which I've realized through these years, is the nature of GBV is that it's devious. It's premeditated. The culprit, the perpetrator, has thought about what he wants to do and how he will do it before he does it. Perpetrators are skilled abusers and manipulators. Perpetrators are pathological liars. What I found in the ministry to be a problem in the counseling sessions of GBV, and we have to start doing something about this, is that victims are shown a different way to what the Bible actually explains the scripture's meaning. Why do I say that? There's a few pointers that I want to list for us, just a few. Women are taught to be subservient to their husbands, right? There's a lot of focus placed on that. Subservient. This brings a certain mindset about that causes women to often allow disagreements to move over into gender-based violence in their marriages. And the devil is blamed for GBV. I understand, but I also want to say we cannot spiritualize everything. The Bible does say in 1 Peter 5:8, yes, the enemy walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Yes, we know that scripture. We learn that scripture since we are small. It's been put into our mind and we know it by heart. It's true. The enemy is active in the world. He is our adversary. We have to stand and pray, I agree. But when a perpetrator consciously makes a decision to hunt for, because we can't call it something else, to hunt for and harm his victims, we cannot spiritualize his actions. We cannot pass the blame to the devil. It is a conscious human being who knows what he is doing, or she. Sometimes we find women being the perpetrators. We have to identify what he has done, and it has to be dealt with accordingly. People often misconceptualize the Bible because they only know their favorite verses, and they don't know what it means within the context that the text was written. Because that verse means something within the chapter that it's in, and that chapter means something within the book that it's in, and that book either belongs to the Old Testament or the New Testament, and it's there for a reason. And there are threads that run through the Bible. We cannot just take one scripture and put a meaning on it and say that we now know what it means. What we do is we derive principles from the Bible, and those principles we apply on our contemporary setting and the situations that we face. Yes, the enemy is out there. We cannot shift the blame and spiritualize it. If the perpetrator made a conscious decision, executed a plan in order to make someone his victim, that is when we say no more. The Bible also says that we should be the salt and the light. Now, what does it mean to be the salt and the light? Matthew 5, verse 13 to 16. And I don't want to throw in a lot of scripture here. I want to bring principles out for us because we need to start delving deeper. As Leon Root from UNISA said last week, we've only but scratched the surface. I perceive that being the salt and the light also means to help others. To be a good example, yes, but to extend a hand of help. And that is what we are here to do. That is why we are here to assist those in need. I perceive the following picture in my mind when I think about gender-based violence. And I want to share that picture with you. And I want you to try and establish that picture in your own mind as I'm speaking now. And I'm going to be 2 more minutes. I perceive the following picture. I think about the current stance in our country regarding gender-based violence, and I see the perpetrators. Let's say we have a huge field. Let's say it's a rugby field. I see perpetrators on the field hunting their victims. I see them dragging them down into the pits of depression. I see women and children being mutilated. Beautiful human beings up to the point where they don't even want to continue living. That's why the people commit suicide. That's why the suicide rates are so high. There's things that's happening behind closed doors that we are not aware of. And for us who want to make a decision and a change to do something for the betterment of society, I experience us as looking on this field and standing on the sidelines and feeling so helpless as we witness this massacre. And I perceived this morning when I was praying about it that we need to change our stance. We need to change the place that we are at in this picture, because that is what we are trying to do through this webinar series. We should be, for those of us who really have a heart and a burden for society and for people, we should be on the field protecting and shielding victims. We should be dragging the perpetrators off the field and putting them in places where they can't hurt anyone else. We should be giving the victims a voice, and we want victims' lives to be restored. You know, I grew up in a time where I could go to school on my bicycle on my own. I don't know if anybody on the panel remembers that, the freedom we had. And I could only come home. The rule in the house was I had to be home before dark. But I could do so. I could go to school. I could go to my extracurricular activities, and I could go home just before dark, and I could do it safely. Today, I cannot let my children ride their bicycles alone in the street, because I'm very well aware of the fact that there are predators out there. My children, your brothers and sisters, people that you know, cannot enjoy the same level of freedom because there are predators, not only in our streets and in our towns, but also in our workplaces. And very sadly, and I say this with a sad heart because I'm in the ministry, but there are also perpetrators in our churches. Society is rife with predators contemplating acts of GBV. Let us make an active change. Let us flip the script and take back the future of our children. My sincerest condolences to everyone who have lost a loved one through gender-based violence. I will now be handing over to Edith Masihofa for her presentation, after which we will introduce Leon for his insights. Thank you, Edith.
Thank you, Anita, for that great introduction and getting us started on the discussion on the types and nature of gender-based violence, with you looking into at the global picture and also the communities. I will very briefly speak about gender-based violence and the forms in which it presents at the workplaces. Firstly, I just want to say, when you see GBV happening in communities or in the global picture and in families and communities, we also need to understand that the workplace is also part of the community and it cannot be treated in isolation. So typically you would find that the perpetrators at community level also tend to be perpetrators when they get to workplace settings. So these are some of the the issues that we are confronted with when we look at GBV within the workplace. And it's important for us to address, because you then find that this is also happening at community level. And basically what informs this type of behavior of the experiences of GBV within the workplace, the bedrock is a system of patriarchy, where men generally feel that they are superior to women and they have occupy more space and political power, workplace power, whether it's on the social and economic front. So the men are very powerful. And also it speaks to how we've raised the boy child in our community. And this boy child grows up to participate in the workplace environment. And I always like to give this example from our African cultural context, where it's not uncommon for a lot of young boys to grow up being told or being socialized that they are better than their sisters, they are better than women. And if a boy child would come back home from school with grades that are lower than his sisters, for example, some parents would even punish that boy child and utter statements such as, how can your sister do better than you? So we have socialized these men, these boys who grow to be men, to think they cannot do worse than a woman, and they are better than a woman in every respect. And you have these men now getting into the workplace with these kind of toxic masculinities. And imagine if that man would then be in a situation or working in a team where his immediate supervisor and boss would be a woman. So it would be going against everything that he grew up believing, that I'm better than a woman. And you find that that's one of the difficulties that women leaders have in the workplace, that they find that their male subordinates resist them as team leaders and don't want, in fact, they sabotage them in the workplace, because they feel that, how can you be my boss when everything that I was raised to believe is that I'm better than a woman in every sense. So those are some of the things that inform the type of GBV that we experience within workplace settings. So that's the one thing. So it's the culture and of patriarchy that we experience. Then we look at the prevalence of GBV itself in the workplace. You find that when you do the studies or research, they speak to at least 20% of people in workplaces report that they have experienced a form of gender-based violence. But what we find typically is that workplace GBV does not get reported. And the reasons why people don't report, there are a wide range of reasons, of course, but mostly because people fear that they would lose their jobs. And then sometimes they also feel that there's limited protection within the workplace itself. There are no policies to protect employees, and where there are policies, people are not, the victims don't feel safe to trust the investigation process, and that to trust that the matter would be handled confidentially. Then there's the big issue of stigma and discrimination within the workplace context, and also self-stigma, where the victims also judge themselves to say, but why did this happen to me? But basically why we see that picture is because within the workplace context, the GBV is informed by, it has to do with issues to do with power and authority and abuse of that power and authority. And what we find typically is that the abusers or perpetrators within the workplace context are always people with power and authority, and they're in a position to influence the employment relationship, to influence benefits, to influence continuity of the employment, or to even give an increment or to punish those individuals. So what we see in the workplace is a subtle form of GBV where you get, you don't get like physical or violence like rape, although in some circumstances it does happen, but that is not so common. What you see more of is the sexual harassment type, where it's a kind of quid pro quo relationship, where the perpetrator gives an impression and the victim clearly understands that if they would participate or welcome these sexual overtures, they would benefit from that relationship. And then there's also an understanding that if they would turn it down, they would be penalized. So what you see, the forms of GBV that present in the workplace, forms of sexual harassment, which include unwelcome verbal, visual, or physical conduct, which are of sexual nature and which impact negatively not only on the individual but also on the working environment, and just create this hostile working environment for the victim and also for others in the workplace who are observing this harassment, and typically they can't do anything about it because usually, like I've said, the perpetrator is usually a person in a position of power and authority. And it becomes such that the victim may not enjoy coming to work, for example. And if they would turn down those that attention, that sexual attention, they might find themselves getting unrealistic workloads, and they get a lot of work. They're actually set up for failure, and when it comes time for performance appraisal, they are rated as underperformers, or life just becomes very difficult for them. And others also report verbal abuse, where they are shouted at in front of colleagues within the workplace context. So it's a wide range of behaviors within the workplace that can constitute harassment. It can also even include comments about individuals dressing and how they present themselves at the workplace. And you find that for a lot of women that don't report harassment is because they fear to be judged by colleagues, because there's always the question, but why you? Why did this happen to you and not other people? And then there's always the blame that perhaps it's the way you dress, maybe you were flirting with the boss and that type of thing. So this leads to harassment. People also report other forms of physical abuse, which can include actual assault or blocking movement within the workplace, inappropriate touching, petting, stroking, and hugging. And I always get the question that what constitutes harassment? When do you know that this is too much or it has gone too far? For example, people are always asking that hugging colleagues in the workplace, is that okay? Sharing rude jokes or sending content of pornographic content via email or via WhatsApp to colleagues in the workplace, is that abuse? Calling colleagues by pet names or nicknames within the workplace and giving compliments that speak to maybe suggestive comments that you are sexy, or this looks really nice on you, you are shaped like a Coca-Cola bottle, or invitations to lunch or dinner by your supervisor. So there's a fine line where it becomes too much and where people feel that perhaps some of these gestures may cross the boundaries and become unacceptable behaviors, and usually lead to harassment within the workplace. So it's important that people call out these behaviors and make it known to your colleagues or supervisors that you don't like it. If you don't like being hugged in the workplace, you must say so. If you don't like people sending you jokes of sexual nature to your email or to your WhatsApp, you must complain and make it known that you don't like it, because it always increases and becomes more and more. So in terms of the types of work-related violence and harassment, you see that there's always the sexual, the physical, the psychological abuse, as well as the economic abuse. So on the psychological, you see that this will include the verbal and non-verbal abuse that I was talking about, and will also include bullying and mobbing, and also maybe kind of making others in the workplace also participate and bully that individual. And in a lot of cases these days, you see that it also crosses into the cyberspace and becomes cyberbullying. So these are some of the forms of harassment that you see within the workplace context. And when you unpack that, when I've spoken to many people in the workplace to say, but how exactly does it present? And the kind of statements that I always receive are that there is request for sexual favors from the supervisors in order for a woman to access a promotion or access to career development or any form of training opportunity or advancement. And you also observe that senior management are also engaged in relationships with junior staff, especially the interns coming out of college. And once you have an individual in a relationship with someone who is a subordinate in the workplace, it always brings the question that to what extent was the individual consenting? Because these are issues to do with the power dynamics within the workplace context. There are also always questions of the dress code within the workplace. If there's no uniform worn at that workplace, sometimes there are issues to do around the dress code and accusations that the victim was dressing in a revealing type of way, wearing miniskirts or very see-through type of clothing, and all that constitutes harassment and can cross over to sexual, verbal, as well as emotional abuse within the workplace context. So that is how it generally presents itself. And when the issue with sexual harassment in the workplace is that because most victims do not report harassment timely, you find that the cases that come forward are usually post the relationship. And you find that many young women especially will report harassment when they are no longer in a relationship with that supervisor or with that boss. And the perpetrator then always comes and says, I was in a relationship with that individual. They're only complaining now because I broke off the relationship and I'm in a relationship with somebody else. So there is always the tension where it's difficult to establish whether this is a false accusation and whether it's vindictive reporting or harassment actually did take place. So it's always important. I know a lot of workplaces now say if anyone is having a relationship with someone at work, it's better to notify human resources to make that relationship notifiable. And it protects both individual in the long run, because then the accused or the perpetrator cannot turn around and say the relationship was consensual and the individual is only complaining now. And by making the relationship notifiable, it also protects the victim from being put through a harassing or a relationship that they are not interested in that they don't want to participate in. We also have in some very few situations where the men in the workplace are also reporting that they are victims of the younger women who also enter into the workspace with an understanding that it's usually the men who are in positions of power and authority, and they're the decision makers within organizations, where the young people actually are aware of this potential power and potential benefits that they can access if they would be in a sexual relationship with a man in a management position, and they actually go out of their way to seduce their bosses in order to benefit from that relationship. So those are some of the issues that you see presenting within the workplace. And then in terms of impact, I want to just end by saying there are lots of impacts to the individuals, to the victims at a personal level, and there are also negative impacts to the organization itself if it would not address gender-based violence within the workplace. At the individual level, you find that the victim starts to experience feelings of low self-esteem, and they don't enjoy coming to work. And many victims also report mental health issues, and they are really affected. They also may have physical effects, and they're afraid really that they would lose their job, and that makes them continue with this relationship, and it impacts negatively on their productivity. You find that the individual is now not performing to the best of their ability because they have this thing hanging over them, and it just lowers their functionality, but mostly it affects the individuals at a mental health level, and most of them need psychosocial support and a lot of counseling post revealing that they were in such a relationship. In terms of the impact to the organization itself, when these cases become reported and become known, you find that the organization itself starts to have a tarnished image within the community and generally in society. And if the victim would make a case to the police and would report this, and if it would get to the courts, there are also financial implications for the organization, where they may also find that you end up paying a lot of money in terms of legal fees, medical costs, as well as the time wasted for the organization. So there would be a lot of negative impacts on that level also for the organization. And a lot of companies want to become the employer of choice and wouldn't want people to associate their business with a culture of abusing women, to say, I don't want to work for that organization because women are not valued, women are bullied, and women are abused sexually in that organization. So you find that these are some of the reasons why employers should protect their employees and ensure that sexual harassment doesn't happen within their workplaces. Then people always ask, but where exactly would GBV happen within the workplace? And you find that sometimes it doesn't happen in your office space or in your settings, whether it's a factory or what you call the workplace. But sometimes it's not even the employees of the company who are perpetrators. We also need to recognize that sometimes it is third party people that we expose our employees to. So they can be our clients, they can be our customers. And if we have employees who are front office staff, where they're sitting at reception, or even if they're sitting in the banking hall, there is need to protect our employees who are working in those sort of areas where they have interface with the public, because sometimes it is the clients and customers who are also abusing or harassing our employees. And sometimes people keep quiet because they always think that if I report, the client is always right and I might actually get myself into trouble. And they keep quiet, and it perpetuates, that violence just carries on. And then it can also spill over to other spaces where, if employees have gone for training and they're at a hotel facility or where they've been provided accommodation, sometimes employees also report that they have been violated when they have gone for a work training. And if this would come to the attention of management, or if this would be reported, that training facility would then be treated as a workplace, because that individual had gone to that training facility for work purposes and they had been sent to that place by their employer. So these are some of the issues that we need to consider as we look at the forms in which GBV presents itself within the workplace. And then always to be reminded that even if we would find a perpetrator within the workplace, we should also pay attention to how this employee conducts themselves within their home and community environment. Because like I said, a perpetrator at work would also be a perpetrator in the community, and vice versa. I'll end there for now, and then maybe we can address specific questions later on.
Yes, fantastic, Edith. Absolutely. I agree with everything that you've said, and it's so wonderful to realize that we are coming together as a collective group with the attendees, everyone online. We are making a difference with this webinar series because we are bringing things that are in the darkness, we are bringing it to light. And I know Leon mentioned in the last session, we do have to get to the places that are difficult to address. We do have to chew those toffees and say, well, it's not a nice topic to discuss. It's a difficult topic to discuss, but we do have to discern what it is all about. So yes, I agree. When you were speaking, I was very, very sad for employees in situations like that because I perceive them to be between a rock and a hard place. It is such a sensitive topic. It is such a stigmatized topic that I understand that they suffer from so much fear. And in the workplace, I mean, how horrible it is if they are reliant, for instance, on certain contracts. I mean, that is just horrendous to think that someone would have to endure certain things because they are reliant on a company or a person or a contract. And these perpetrators, as Lizette has also said in the previous sessions with you, she agrees with you, is that the perpetrators are not only at the workplace, they also choose victims in their social settings. So I've got lovely comments here, and I'm going to read some of the comments for you. I want to say to the attendees, please would you put your questions or your comments in the Q&A function. We do have a question that we are going to address with regards to the police, but I just want to read some comments here from Tereso Kanyani. She says, thank you, Edith, for that. That's why even equality still remains a pipeline dream. Women's subordinate roles are underpinned by cultural norms and beliefs depriving them of power. How can we address this power by dynamics, cultural? So I'm going to direct that question to you, Edith, and then we will move over to Leon. Teresa, there is a question in the Q&A that I would like to ask you a little bit later. So Edith, can you just answer Teresa, how can we address this power dynamics, cultural? And then over to Leon, thank you.
Thank you for that. I think the workplace has to firstly recognize that their employees come into the workplace with these cultural influences. And a lot of times I feel that employers think people get into the workplace and drop or leave who they are at the gate and pick up their personalities at 5 p.m. when they go home. So we need to understand that people enter the workplace with all their prejudices, with all the stereotypes, with all the toxicity of the patriarchal environment in which they were raised, which is why it's important for us to start having these discussions of having gender dialogues within the workplace, to start raising awareness of gender and GBV within the workplace, and then to support men to address those issues to do with masculinity through gender transformation norms, and then eventually to also create a safe space for both men and women by creating and training gender champions within the workplace that can support continuously within the workplace environment the issues to do with gender toxicity and how women and men relate to each other within the workplace context. And then ultimately, the most important thing is for every employer to develop a policy which is a zero tolerance policy for sexual harassment within their workplace, and to make sure that every employee is aware of that policy and its provisions, and for them to understand that there will be penalties for would-be perpetrators. I think those are some of the things that an employer can begin to do within the workplace. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's kind of like these victims are in a lose-lose situation if they are in a corporation where they know top management are men and they are the perpetrators, and they know those are the men that make the rules, like you've mentioned. So yes, bringing awareness and putting in a zero tolerance policy. I've got a lovely comment for you from Lorna Jonathan. She says, Edith, thank you for your magnificent presentation. You are a dynamic speaker. God bless you. So that is for you from Lorna Jonathan. Thank you, Edith. Leon, in a few minutes, can you just give us your insights on the nature and types of gender-based violence, and then we will move over to the Q&A. I've got a few questions for the panel. I'm going to direct the first question to Toriso, but would you please give us your insights on the nature and the types of gender-based violence? We want to draw from your experience. Thank you, Leon.
Yeah, colleagues, Edith, you have really gone over the whole spectrum of our webinars, and you have addressed so many things that it makes it that we need to bring it to the point, how do we translate some of these things to real action? Listening to all the discussions up to now and even seeing what is in the chat, I think it's important to take a step back and also analyze gender-based violence from the notion of what is involved in gender-based violence, not only the types, but what are the key kind of dimensions. And the biggest dimension is power and control. That in any form of abusive relationship, and colleagues, a gender-based violence is just one kind of abusive relationship. There are so many other forms of abusive relationships that if we sit back in our life, we might even have to interrogate ourselves. How do we contribute to some of these phenomena ourselves by either being silent and tolerate or actually being active in some of these spaces? And, basically in racism, for instance, silence is violence. And I think this speaks back to the space too. If we keep silent, it is violence. We cannot anymore stand on the periphery and say, well, it's somebody else's issue, it's somebody else's problem. It is everyone. So when I look at gender-based violence from that power and that control, it has to do a lot with somebody who sees themselves in power over another person. How they express it is through violence, physical, emotional, and even it could be economical, and it could be also socially. So we talk a lot about physical violence and a bit about emotional violence, but we don't always talk about the economic violence that comes in gender-based violence, because sometimes what happens in this space, we start to realize that many relationships that you have, especially close relationships, are built under the understanding that both of you are supposed to be equal and both of you is supposed to be in harmony with each other. But in that power space, it's not always happening. And you find suddenly spaces where people are using the economical resources to manipulate the situation and even use it as a form of abuse. We heard cases where women have, for instance, when they earn more, told men that men should keep quiet and that men should know their place, and even they should not interfere with the raising of a child, because suddenly they are the ones that are now the breadwinner. They are the ones that are the one that provide materialistic to the child, and that then isolate the man from that kind of spaces. We also know on the other flip side of cases where women have been economically captured and even kept hostage. Students of ours who needs the economical means to survive, paying their study fees, paying their accommodation, paying their livelihood per day, and then they enter into transactional relationships that are always not equal in power. And this is the kind of thing that we need to go in. The second element is control, because in all these kind of abusive relationship, there is a controller and then there's the controlled, the person who is under the control of the other. And that makes it that this relationship is very much managed from that to even to some extent that some people stay in abusive relationships because for them, that's how they transfer meaning. And also that gives them security. And that's why often you find people in abusive relationships because they don't have alternatives to go to, or they don't see themselves in an alternative lifestyle. And they tolerate and they actually adopt this violence, especially emotional violence, in such a way that they actually skewly translate it into the space of love, of caring, and even a sense of, this is just how the person expresses themselves. But it becomes like a symbiotic relationship then. The abuser is abusing the abused. The abused is taking on the role of accepting the abuse, feeding the monster of abuse, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And then what happens is people don't get out of a cycle, and it even transfer from generation to generation to generation. So although we may say, yes, the perpetrator may have an intent, we have to also take a bit of a step back sometimes to understand the context in which the intent is cultivated and in which it is actually supported and even enforced. Because a lot of abusive relationships come from histories of abuse. And that's what they say, I hurt because I was hurt, and therefore I hurt again. And this is really true. If you even look at yourself, how do you deal if somebody disappoints you? How do you deal if somebody hurts you or somebody is just not there for you? Often the coping mechanism is to hurt back. You know, that sometimes the Bible even say the eye for an eye, that people justify that kind of action. To say, you know, I, in my full right, I can do exactly what people done on me, that I can do upon them. But that is how people justify. And that brings it that we bring other forms of gender-based violence into this conversation that we see are rising now. There is a lot of violence of women also against men. We see it a lot. There's physical violence. I had cases where men are physically abused by their wives, by their love partners. We have read it in the newspaper where celebrities even come out and say they are in that kind of relationship where the woman is the abuser and she abuses him physically, emotionally, and socially. They humiliate the man. They demasculate the man in public spaces. So they will go out and make jokes about masculinity, about sexual issues, about his performance, his inability to contribute to the money of a house. And then you get another form of abuse coming in, and that is same-sex kind of abuse. That in the LGBTI community, we start to also see a rise, not a rise, but an awareness that this is happening even in gender-based, in LGBTI communities, where same-sex spaces, people also have experiences of this power and control that becomes abusive. And the other form that is coming in is amongst the genders. So we find women abusing other women. And we see it a lot in the workplaces, that suddenly this rise of women in powerful positions coming into the space of occupying high-level positions, that there's a tendency that they will really make sure nobody comes into that same space. And they will do anything to discredit, to even dehumanize fellow women. And I see it even at workplaces that I've worked with, that you know, people are thinking when you are a woman, you're going into that position, you will fight for the rights of women. But the opposite happens often, that these women who are fighting for their position up there is fighting against the masculine culture of the organization. And then they think they must act like a man, and therefore they must treat other women like a man treat a woman. Or there's this kind of professional jealousy coming in. But I also have seen it men against men, that there's a dominant kind of man in culture, in family, and in circles of friends that will mock, dehumanize, humiliate the other kind of man. The man that is maybe self-caring, get a foreseen label. The man who is more in tune with his emotions are seen as a lesser man. The man that is to the other extreme of taking care of himself, his body, and maybe even wear some self-care makeup in face and things like that, is seen as unacceptable. And I see it especially in social media when we talk about the imaging of trans women and trans men. The ultimate, it is sickening to see what people actually live, and that people's perceptions are of the other. And this kind of abuse comes then into a play that you can see it in the imaging spaces of like even the media who abuse this space, that they portray that stereotype man, woman kind of thing, that kind of violent space that comes with that gender. Then the last one that I want to talk that I'm very worried about is the whole thing of family murder. Family murder. And I'm talking from both sides. In my studies, I've studied family murder where mostly men are the ones who committed family murder. And you know what? In the studies, it showed that the men justified through religion, specifically Christianity, that they suddenly lose their job and then they feel demasculated, or they feel their manhood has been removed. And then they feel that they cannot, if they commit suicide, they cannot leave their family behind. And often in the suicide notes, they say, I take my family to a better place, I take them to heaven. So I cannot leave them with a scandal behind. So therefore I take them with me. And that is how I rescue them from what is left behind. And that justification plays out even on this side, where we see so many cases lately of people who kill their own children. We had so many cases lately of, the court case that is going on today, the mother who killed her 5 children, hanging them, burning them down in a house. Why do we do that? And it has to do sometimes with this notion that I have, again, the power and the control to decide about the existence of the other. And therefore, I take it in a self-righteous, self-justice way, and I take control of their lives by taking that life away from them. And my reasoning, my rational thinking is, I save them from the suffering that I leave behind. So to conclude my part of this contribution, to a link to what Edith is also saying, we need to look at this bigger picture. Why is it that we have this desire to have control and to have power over other people, while our humanity is totally against it? And we need to look at institutions like a religion, and how does religion plays a role making these hierarchies of power in our community alive and justify it. Our culture is an ever-evolving space. It should never become in a space that a culture of yesterday is relevant for today. It should ever evolve because it helps us to actually change over time. So some cultural practices that maybe we could have justified in the past, and we should continuously revisit and relook from what is happening now. And that's why we can call some cultural practices as harmful to the sense of gender-based violence. But we must be very careful that when we work in the space with culture, we have to be sensitive, because you cannot tell somebody who have been for generations been told that Untitled that is practiced in the Eastern Cape, where the woman is at a young age abducted for grooming for the marriage, that's wrong, because that makes cultural sense in that cultural context. And all that we can do is raise awareness with the chiefs, with the other significant people, to actually start to see their culture have to consider a change. But we must be very careful to come in with an approach of cultural superiority. And this is something that, especially in this space, we have to be careful.
Yeah.
Then thirdly, the institution is us as education. We need to make sure that we as universities, schools, and education institutions play a role to raise awareness, but raise it responsibly. We cannot just transfer knowledge and then think the other side is able to digest what we give and will be okay. We need to embrace the ethics of care in our space. Thank you, Anita.
Absolutely, Leon. Thank you very, very much. I agree, and what I feel comes out to me, that speaks to me between what you've discussed with us here and what Edith has discussed as well, is there are many misconceptions. Many misconceptions of what true masculinity is and how we are to conduct ourselves. And yes, it is going to take a very long time, and we have to tread carefully, so as not to offend and also so as not to hurt people. But absolutely, we have to discuss these matters. When you were speaking about family murders, I was just so saddened to think that people actually exercise that type of control on their families and just decide if people are able to live on or if they are going to take their lives. It's a grievance, and it's very, very sad to think of this. But these are the things that we have to discuss. I want to discuss with Teresa. Teresa, there was an interesting comment and question, and I remember one of your presentations in the previous sessions. That's why I'm going to direct it at you first before we discuss it with Leon and Edith as well, please. Lorna made a comment there. She says, it's really frightening when men are abusive. A male member of staff was very aggressive to me and I did not accept. I reported him to the police. I had protection order delivered to him and he faced a disciplinary hearing with the department. God gave me the strength to stand up to him, and I'm blessed that he had to face the might of the law. Now she asks, what can we do when the local police don't follow up a case of rape that was reported? She says she knows of a case that happened a year ago and was never resolved. And Teresa, I know you mentioned in one of your presentations that you have also witnessed or have knowledge of cases where these activities were reported, but nothing transpired from it. Would you mind to discuss that with us? Thank you.
Jonita, I think she did put earlier on that she's stepping out for a training session.
Oh, okay, in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. Edith, would you like to comment on that question? What do we do if something is reported and it's not being dealt with the authorities? Leon, I will pose the question to you next.
It's unfortunate that we do get these cases, because remember, it's always usually about the power dynamics. And if the perpetrator is powerful and they are moneyed, they are known to go to those police stations and pay a bribe. Remember, our communities, there's also a lot of corruption, even in the police departments. And sometimes these cases don't go anywhere because of that corruption and because the perpetrator has paid a bribe. So I would suggest that I think we have to report also to some pressure groups in our communities so that we make enough noise about it in the community. I know that that's difficult for a lot of people because then it's not so private anymore. And I think that's what the police are actually will be hoping for, that what are the chances that the individual will want to go public with this? And it's unfortunate. It's one of those areas that sometimes to get justice, we have to make it known. We have to make it notifiable and make others know about it.
Yes, yes. And I mean, this probably happens globally as well. And it's very sad. It's very sad to notice that these things do happen, and that often the places where people are meant to go for protection are often places that are part of the problem. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very sad also in the religious space that the pastors are the people at the religious spaces where people are supposed to draw help from and guidance, and often the pastors are a part of the problem, which is very saddening. But I would like to direct that question at you, Leon, as well. What would your strategy be for us to implement or to suggest if someone has reported something and that has transpired and nothing is being done about it?
In South Africa, we have dedicated centers, and I think it's called Twararang centers of the police that specifically is dedicated for gender-based violence. The police officers are very much trained, but there are also other professional services in those centers. So I would see if we can share with you the correct name of it. Maybe,
Yes.
Juanita, you can just Google.
Okay.
But colleagues, that is a very user-friendly, a very protective environment, because as you come in, there's a whole team working with you. But I think what Edith is saying is very true, because we need to also take a step back and say, where is the community care? Because often when people go to the police, it is like a kind of a last resort, because nobody else believes in them, nobody else is listening to them, and nobody else is taking it seriously enough. In all our circles, family, friends, colleagues, everywhere we go, there are people talking to us, and there are people telling us that they are in need. And I think we don't hear them anymore. And that's where it starts for me, before it gets even to the police station. It's time to really listen to each other, because then we will hear the voice long before even the action even happen. Or if it happens, we can stop it, because we can support that person, we can go with them to the police station, we can be there for them all the way, because it's a very painful process to actually get the whole prosecution happening, because the law is so sad that in many ways you as the victim have to prove your innocence, and the perpetrator is actually standing back. And this is how sometimes our laws are also not very friendly to this space, that it's the other way around, that not the perpetrator have to prove his innocence, but the victim. And I think this means that we need to mobilize community care, and it starts with our homes. Listen to your children when they talk, hear them, and hear them of the different spaces that they're in. How's it going at school? Are they experiencing any kind of unhappiness there? Hear them. Listen to your family, listen to your loved one, and you will be amazed in the end of the day that it's right in your own space where it's happening. And then we can change this, because then we will become the caring community.
Yeah. Absolutely, Leon. I'm thinking of a conference that we did many years ago, and just to use it as an example, it was about people that are stolen, people that are abducted and sold as slaves. And I'll never forget at the end of that presentation, the presenter said, "You think it's only happening in another town. You think it's only happening in another country. It's happening to your neighbors. It's happening to the people that you work with. It's happening to someone that is your best friend that cannot speak up about it." And it's the same with GBV. It's not just over there and far removed. It is our neighbors. It's people we know in the congregation. It's right here. It's real and it's happening. And I agree that we have to support each other, and we have to stop the problem initially where it starts before it goes any further. I have a lovely comment here for you, Leon, from Lorna. She says, "You are a wonderful speaker. May God continue to bless you as you assist women to realize their potential and know that they are indeed very strong and that there are dignified men around." That gives us hope. Thank you, Lorna. Thank you very much. Shirley Rahman, we welcome you to this session. I know that you joined a little bit late, but we are so happy to have you here. I'm so glad that you were able to join. Just to the panelists, just in 2 or 3 minutes, would you like to just give some input on her comment? She says she agrees and we must be sensitive, but what is wrong must be challenged. Early marriages robs the child of her childhood and she cannot make decisions about her body. Edith, maybe in 2 or 3 minutes for each of the panelists, could you just reply to Shirley? What is your viewpoint on early marriages?
Definitely, early marriages are a form of abuse, and in fact, it should be treated as statutory rape. You will find that mostly is because of it happens in religious circles. There are some churches that do allow for people to marry the minor child. And this has been noticed in some faith-based, like Pentecostal type apostolic churches have that practice. And then again, when we look at community level, in some patriarchal societies, and because of the attended problems that parents may experience when a child falls pregnant, for example, a teenager falls pregnant. I know we've been discussing in the past 2 weeks of the problem of teenage pregnancy in South Africa and also in Zimbabwe. You find that parents are now settled with the problem or decision to say their 15-year-old, 16-year-old is pregnant. They are thinking about the unborn child and who is going to take care of this unborn child and of also their child, the maternity costs. And really, if it's a resource constrained family or background, you may find that those parents might actually prefer to marry off the minor child because they're thinking, at least if there is a man to provide for her and to provide for the unborn child, so that it doesn't become an additional financial burden to the family. You find families taking that decision of not reporting the perpetrator because they are afraid that if the perpetrator then goes to prison, then the responsibility to take care of that minor child would then fall on them as the parents. And if they don't have money, you find that they are willing to marry off that child. And I see it a lot happening in our communities. It's really very sad.
Very, very sad, Edith. Thank you for that. It's absolutely, it should not be allowed. It's transgression against the person who really, absolutely. Leon, I give over to you for some comments in 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you.
I just want to respond and maybe clarify. Shirley said that she was not concerned what I said. What I want to do, and I want to sensitize all of us, these things are not simple. They are not one recipe fit all. Please, we need to unbundle it in a way to analyze it truly and understand it, what is happening and who are the people involved. So when we talk about child marriage, there's more at stake sometimes that we need to consider from various angles. There's a lot of also research that I've seen where the women have reported that when they are actually not in that kind of, and we even see it in South Africa, when women are sometimes not in abusive relationships, they actually feel that the man don't love them. And I work with young people about this, and in dialogue it came out that one of the women said that, if a man just don't slap me sometimes, I feel he's not loving me, he's actually looking at another woman. And you need to ask yourself, but where does this come from? And that's how deep we need to go. So I think what I want to advocate for, we need to be direct, yes, but we need to be sensitive, because we can never disconnect values and beliefs from these things. And these things are generations for generations for generations, because for generations, child marriage made sense for that culture. And at the end, how they justify it versus how we justify it, it might be total conflict points. But it's not in our right just to come in and go like a sword and say either or. We need to go into dialogues. We need to raise awareness to this whole conversation. And we must be very careful of just making these things as simple as they sometimes appear. They are so deep-rooted that we need to uproot and actually plant the plant into a fertile soil. And sometimes it's total new soil. It cannot be the same soil. So yes. I just feel very strongly about that.
Very, very, very good. Yes, excellent answer and an excellent question as well. We have to digest, we have to enter into dialogue. We have to look at all the sides of the story, and the intention and the purpose is to bring betterment and to bring development and to bring growth and to help. And Anne Jensen made a lovely comment from Sweden. She says, be the voice for those who have lost theirs. And that is really the purpose. It's to digest these issues, to discuss, to give and take. I mean, it's a relationship that is being built between everyone that is involved. And a relationship is always a give and a take nature. So yes, I want to answer Aquili. I hope I said your name right. Aquili Otiu, who asked, please can I have the recordings of the sessions? I just want to say these sessions are recorded and they are edited and posted on YouTube, Golden Key Southern Africa YouTube channel. Should you have any queries or questions for the presenters and the panelists from our collaborators, UNISA, SAfAIDS, Vitality Wellness, or Father and Nation, you are welcome. I think, Natasha, will you put the email address for us in the chat function? You are welcome to email southafrica@goldenkey.org, southafrica@goldenkey.org. So also the YouTube channel is Golden Key Southern Africa. Teresa says she's back and she says, thank you, our panelists. The presentations were excellent. Thank you, Teresa. You are also very valuable to us, to everyone on the panel. We enjoy you. I want to ask the presenters for final comments in 1 minute before we close. Edith, if you would like to sum up what has transpired here in 1 minute, and then Leon, and then I will close off the session for us. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Juanita. I just want to end by saying I urge all employers to address GBV in the workplace, to raise awareness, and to include a zero tolerance statement that they communicate to all their employees. And when they have programs, I think it's important for them to pay attention to and implement a survivor-centered approach, which looks at protecting both the rights of the individuals and ensuring that the complaint mechanism is confidential, and that the investigation process protects the survivor, and that there will be penalties for the perpetrators. Thank you.
Definitely, definitely. Leon, in 1 minute, please, your final thoughts.
Colleagues, I repeat, silence is violence. So it means we all have to get now into this. And sometimes you will be the voice of the voiceless, but sometimes it needs action. And that means that we have to go to the streets, we have to go into our communities, and we need to do it. So we must stop theorizing, stop having even these kind of webinars, and really go out and change the world for our children and for everyone else. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Definitely solution finding and then going into practical application. That is what we aim to do. So everyone in attendance today, please take what you've learned here, take it out to your families, your friends, your people that you study with, the rest of your classmates, people that you know are maybe victims of GBV. Make these recordings available to them, invite them and assist them, give them a voice, and tell them that they do not have to be fearful. We know that people want love and acceptance, and this platform offers love and acceptance, and we want to give a voice to those, as Anne said, we want to speak up for those who are not able to speak up. Just a very interesting fact within a minute, I read somewhere that a study showed that Hitler, for instance, took a few babies, I think it was 50 babies, and he gave them care, he gave them milk and the physical care that they needed, but the people were not instructed to pick up the babies and to give them love. And within 6 months, all the babies passed away. And what does that tell us? It tells us that we are human beings, and we have been built, we have been constructed to have the need for love and care. And that is really what we want to extend to all the attendees and the victims of GBV. We are here for you. We want to care for you. We want to assist you, and we want to help you. And may everyone that attended here today think of one person that they can give this information to, and think of strategies of how we can, as Leon says, go out there and make a difference in society. Paul says, thank you for the insightful session. Pravani says, thank you, colleagues, for the insightful presentations. Aquili says, thank you for your excellent presentations. Yes, Leon, for our children. So in that light, we just want to say thank you from Golden Key Southern Africa, from UNISA, Vitality Wellness, SAfAIDS, and Father and Nation. Thank you for joining our session. Our next session will be on Monday, And I'm just going to give you the information. It's Monday, 20 September at 1 p.m. and the topic will be gender-based violence and young adults in the communities. So please, if you look on the social media, get your links, register for the webinar. And if you have any queries, please email southafrica@goldenkey.org for further queries. We will put you in connection. If you have questions, we will forward them to the presenters. And come ready with your questions on Monday. We would love to engage with you. So from that, have a lovely day. You are now welcome to leave this session by clicking the end button at the bottom right hand of your screen. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon. Goodbye.